Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us here. Okay. Can go with we are the Ocean Plastics Recovery Projects. So my story with marine debris started on this day in 2025. Actually, that's not the picture I'd hoped, but it started in 2005. I had just quit my career as a Coast Guard officer to start a new business as a kayak guide. So great career move, right? So I'm leading a 5-day trip around a Kayak Island. And one night on the beach, I came across a little green plastic frog. So not knowing what it was, I strapped it to the bow of my kayak, eyes forward, to be my lookout for the rest of the trip. And one day a friend sent me this feature article in Harper's Magazine. It was written by Donovan Hone, and it described the causes and impacts of marine plastic pollution through the story of the floaties toys. So if you haven't heard it before, in 1992, a container spill of 28,800 bathtub toys was set adrift somewhere off Hawaii, and they had been washing up all over the world ever since. So this frog, my frog, that I found in 2005 was one of those toys. And by the way, we're still finding them. We found one in 2021, which was, I think, which would be 29 years after it was set free, and still durable, still in good shape. So about a year later, I started Island Trails Network. That's a nonprofit organization out of Kodiak with a mission, yes, to build trails in the dirt, but also to look after and be a steward for all of the 1,500 miles of coastline we have there. So we started our marine debris program at ITN in 2007 with trucks and four-wheelers and volunteers from the community. And we gradually scaled those over time to bigger and bigger cleanups, especially in the years after the Japan tsunami, which saw an injection of funding, but also a huge influx of new marine debris like we hadn't seen before. By 2018, ITN had cleaned up hundreds of thousands of pounds of marine debris and had a strong collection program funded mostly by NOAA grants.
The same year that Andy founded ITN, I left my job in the chemical industry to join a small startup in California that was recycling plastics. It was a big change for me. As a chemical engineer, I was used to working with liquids and gases. I was used to using statistics to track the quality of my raw materials and measuring contamination in parts per billion. Now I was working with a complex waste stream, mostly shredded electronics and automobiles, to extract the plastics and try to make a high quality plastic product. This type of recycling is known as mechanical recycling. It's where you shred things up to liberate materials, you extract the non-plastics, and then you sort the individual plastics by type, and then eventually you melt them down and compound them to form new materials that can be used into production. This was a good time for me to switch to the industry. It was a company that I joined was very innovative. And it was at a time when there wasn't a lot of equipment to do this. So we were having to look at other industries like mining and agriculture to try to find what they were doing to separate materials, and then also inventing our own machines. And so it was a good opportunity to learn a lot very quickly. And from there, I went in and joined some other startups that were doing chemical recycling of plastics and conversion technologies where you convert it to fuel. And most recently, I joined a team at Google X where we're developing AI-enabled material identification technology so we can better see at the molecular level what these materials are, and then use machine learning to kind of guide recycling processes. So all of this turns out to be pretty useful with ocean plastics, which is also a complex waste stream.
So by 2018, I'm still with the nonprofit. We'd cleaned up hundreds of thousands of pounds. We had a lot of work behind us. But right around that time, China put a ban on imports of plastic waste. At the same time, and because of this really, the bottom fell out of the recycling markets, and wherever we were sending it no longer wanted it. We already had ruled out the Kodiak landfill because our municipal landfills in Alaska are not built to handle the marine debris waste stream, and so they had already sort of blacklisted us, and our material's not welcome there. So I had a marine debris program and was sort of still doing cleanups every year, scaling them larger, but it had, I had nowhere to send the material. So around that time, a mutual friend of ours, Bree Witteveen, she's the one on the left, just about to disentangle a whale. She was actually a colleague of John's and is part of that small community too. Bree is one of my wife's best friends, and she introduced me to Scott. Sorry. So I'll turn it over to you to take it from there.
So, so when I first met Andy, I thought I was just going to help him out and introduce him to folks in the industry that I knew that had been working with ocean plastics. But the more we dug, we found that most people were either dealing with ocean-bound plastics, which are materials that haven't really got out into the ocean yet, or they were working with end-of-life gear, both of which are a little bit easier streams to work with. And those that had tried ocean plastics had done so with very limited success. And so after several months of meeting over the phone, I decided to take a trip up to Alaska, my first one of many, and to meet Andy in person and to look at the materials he'd been collecting. And what I saw was a lot of good value in the material. Some of it was very degraded, but a lot of it, I could see a path to getting it back into products in the future. And so as we continued to meet, we met a polymer scientist who at the time was with BASF and later went on to, she now runs the recycling technology development at the National Renewable Energy Lab. But she became an advisor of ours and really pushed us to form an organization that focused on this research element and try to really find out the best ways to recover value from these materials. So with that, we created the Ocean Plastics Recovery Project. We named it a project because we kind of want it to end at some point. But for our lifetime, it'll probably go on. And our founding mission was to remove the plastics from the environment, to work on this research, to develop these reuse, recycling, and recovery technologies, and then to share what we learned with the global community. And then as part of that, we set up four core pillars: collection, outreach, research, and education.
Our approach to collection has always been just roll up your sleeves and go big. In most parts of Southeast and South Central Alaska, that's taken the form of boat-based cleanup operations. They last a week or more. They usually involve about 15 to 20 people when you count the boat crew. Outside of OPR, I'm a partner in 3 boats in Kodiak, and so over the years, I've had the opportunity to apply them to this work and fine-tune our methods. I'm sure you can imagine it's a real trick to get a 300-pound bag of line into one of these skiffs, especially if you have a dumping surf and a falling tide. So we've built 2 skiffs now with this in mind. Back on the boat, it's all about eating well and getting rested for the next day and go and do it all again. At OPR, our expeditions have evolved to include students mostly, and we combine them with subject matter experts in science and engineering. So that can be a marine biologist, a chemist, an engineer, or a policy expert. The students over the last few years have been mostly college undergrads working on recycling or material sciences from our partner universities, and I think Scott will name who they are. So this year we ran these boat-based expeditions in Southeast Alaska, basing our operations out of the village of Klawak. And over the course of 2 trips in May, we collected 34,120 pounds of marine debris, most of which we will recycle, and Scott's going to talk about that later too. Slide. We do our work on remote coastlines that most people never see. So it's important that we tell the story of what we're doing, and we tell a good story. By the time marine debris washes up in Alaska, it's too late for prevention. But if we tell a good story, we can change the way people think about, use, and recycle plastic. And this is our contribution, we like to say, to the global narrative on the health of the oceans. OPR's chief storyteller is an Alaskan-grown filmmaker named Max Romy. This is him here. I first met Max when he was an undergrad minoring in film. I hired him on a Kayak Island crew in 2015, I think, and I told him I didn't have a budget for a film, but that I could pay him a crew share. I just had to make sure he picked up as much debris as everyone else, which is like the impossible task, right, for an artist is I'm going to make something great, meanwhile pulling my weight on a team. And of course, this was an impossible task, and so despite filling up a whole hard drive with footage, we never made a film that year. When Scott and I, formed OPR, the first thing we did was reach out to him. I said, I've got some unfinished business with this artist, and I think we could really make something great here. And so after we started working again on a marine debris idea, Max really got inspired. He had now found watercolor paint as one of his new skills and has started incorporating that into his films. So our first short film was called If You Give a Beach a Bottle. It's a short one, just at 5 minutes, but it's really gotten around, traveled well. It's now shown in over 49 countries. The second film, Footprints on Katmai, is touring right now and runs about 20 minutes, and so it can dive deeper into the issues. I'm glad we have 25 minutes to discuss kind of everything we think about with ocean plastics. So we are wanting to tell sort of this complicated story. You can see both these films, by the way, on our website.
So from the outset, we knew we'd also need to put as much effort into research as we did collection. Some portions of the stream are really relatively simple to process. They're very similar to what we see in traditional recycling processes. But most of it requires research to find the best methods to extract value and return the materials to commerce at their highest and best use. So we've partnered with a number of universities, and since Andy said I would name them, our first partner was Oregon State, and I'd done some lecturing there on recycling years before, and they welcomed us with open arms and started connecting us to other universities as well. So we quickly grabbed Purdue, Western Washington University, which has been probably one of our biggest partners and has done the most research for us. And then we've got University of Southern Mississippi, and last year we added UMass Lowell and Northwestern. And these are some of the best polymer universities in the country, and we've got access to their labs and their students, and in exchange we bring them up to do work for us. So I guess we get a pretty good deal there. Yeah. And so anyways, with this, we've got these university partners, which helps us do some of this fundamental research, but there's also a lot of companies that are doing innovative recycling methods that are geared towards different parts of the waste stream. And so we've been working to find those that could also be suited towards or used towards ocean plastics. And so we've got about a dozen or so industrial partners as well, from small startups to large chemical corporations. Our research aims to determine what recycling methods are possible as a first step, and then which are feasible from a techno-economic standpoint. And then finally, and most importantly, is what's best is measured by like the environmental footprint of the technology. And then our fourth pillar is education. Throughout the year, we work with our partner universities to incorporate recycling education into their curriculum, and also guest lecture at a few other universities. As Andy mentioned, we curate our boat-based cleanups to include high school students, our university students that do research for us, and industry professionals. And so we get people from, as Andy mentioned, marine biology to the polymer industry, but also get fields like economics and policy and others that can contribute to helping us better understand how we can make this whole system work better. On our cleanups, each day we dedicate about an hour to an hour and a half for education in the afternoon. It's kind of like after lunch we get into teaching, and our university students report out on the research they've been doing for us, and the industry professionals teach us about their expertise. So it's a great opportunity to share knowledge.
It's awesome to me, by the way, as comes to my mind as he's talking about our students, how the best and brightest who are going into plastics and polymer science now are not trying to put more of it together and not trying to make more plastics. They're learning how to take it apart, knowing what this problem, that this is a serious, societal problem. So last year we teamed up with Alaska Sea Grant, the Aleut community of St. Paul, on a $5.8 million NOAA-funded grant under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Later on, we brought on the Ocean Conservancy, who has also recently increased their presence in Alaska. And together, we call ourselves the Alaska Center for Marine Debris. We're now a new statewide resource for managing marine debris. And so we'll get to each of these elements here of this grant, but I want to point out first the response component. Through this grant, we've identified up to $250,000 to be used as response funding for a marine debris event. We believe this to be a first. We've also stockpiled some cleanup materials in Kodiak and hope to be able to quickly deploy large quantities of bags and PPE wherever it needs to go. Because of the way this grant works, though, we're going to have to expend all the grant funds by 2027. And so we will have to spend that money too. It'll be expended as a grant under our competitive grant program, but the seed money for response is going to go away. So now we're looking for a source of permanent response funding to take over once those funds are absorbed. And you could always use more, right? So we're excited about treating marine debris. I think we've long felt it deserved the same kind of response resources that other environmental disasters can have. We haven't had one happen here to where we learned all those hard lessons. Instead, we'd like to be ready when it does happen. Just one container of microplastics spilling off a container ship in the Aleutians can be disastrous for an ecosystem. So if that happens, let's hope it doesn't, we want to be ready. Next slide. One of the goals of the center is to lower the barriers to entry for communities to start marine debris programs. So we have a competitive grant program. The grant application is streamlined. It's only 7 pages long. Does not require a match. This was important to many of us. It's been important to me for a long time. If you're working in a remote community, there are people who are passionate about their shores and passionate about their environment there. But the match requirement almost makes it seem like they have to ante up and that this is their problem. And so I've been making the case for a long time. We should be paying these people for their work. It's worth it. The ecosystem is worth it. The restoration work is more than worth it. And so there's no match requirement for this grant funding. So the center funded 8 projects. Well, initially there were baked into the initial grant application, there was a project in St. Paul, and the Aleut community of St. Paul will do ghost pot removal there in the Pribilofs. A similar ghost pot removal will be awarded to Douglas Indian Association. The Kayak Island cleanup and monitoring program was funded, which I'll talk about later. And the community of Port Hayden, which had been, just like me, sitting on a big cache of marine debris that they didn't know what to do with, it finally got to ship it away, and now they've resumed their marine debris program. So those were sort of the shovel-ready seed projects. Since then, we've awarded 8 more and $1.3 million. This is administered and run by Alaska Sea Grant. You will hear them advertising the grant opportunity. And there's still more money to spend, so you can expect to see another round of grant opportunities come soon. But the idea is really to build capacity for removal and to grow marine debris programs across Alaska. So Kayak Island is an exciting project for me because it's one of the worst impacted areas I've ever seen. It may also be familiar to some of you who live and work in Prince William Sound. The Kayak Island Cleanup and Monitoring Project is designed to be a high tonnage cleanup, but also a long-term study of reaccumulation of ocean plastics over time. We'll go back year after year as long as we can keep raising money. We're funded for 2 years. One of those is done, and so we'll have some funding to go back next year. But the idea is to have it be sort of a report card on how we're doing globally in solving the marine plastic problem. And you know, it's an amazing place. It's a great storytelling place. The landscape is dramatic. And we're excited to be, having a long-term presence there. So in this, our first year working at Kayak Island, we hired 33 individuals throughout the winter and spring for this big summer event. We had 3 cleanup crews who spanned approximately 2 weeks each. From May 27th to June 2nd, an advanced crew and volunteers upgraded the Cape St. Elias lighthouse facilities. That was as part of a partnership with the Cape St. Elias Lightkeepers. And we were upgrading it just because we were going to move in, and we wanted to make sure it had the galley and enough beds and could support a footprint like ours. But I think we left it much better than we found it, and we're going to continue to upgrade that historic facility. So our crews slept and took their meals in the lighthouse every day. They took a helicopter to work every morning. There was no boat present during most of the cleanup. The main cleanup effort occurred from June 3rd to July 12th and covered about 8.7 miles. Our crews mapped and collected 116,330 pounds of marine debris through July 9th. Those materials were to be sling loaded to a barge on July 10th, but the weather limited that effort, and only a little more than half of it was actually removed on that day. So we went back, did some additional fundraising, and ended up going back in September to remove the rest of it. And as of right now, I'm glad to say, as winter closes in, that all the materials are off Kayak Island, and now they're in Kodiak for characterization and processing. Next slide.
So under this grant that we got that started the Alaska Center for Marine Debris, we also funded the start of our innovation center. That, along with some donations from Oregon State University that had some equipment they hadn't been using anymore, and some of our own investment, we officially opened our facility. What's really neat to me is this started out as a watercolor that Max did, and now if you go to that same area and take a picture, it kind of looks like that, except we've closed in the end to protect our equipment. And so the facility has the capacity right now to sort and size reduce ocean plastics to create several different grades of plastic flakes, which is an intermediate step that still needs to go to a recycler or could go directly to some manufacturing processes. But what we hope to do in the future is continue to build on what we've started and get to the point where we can do the full recycling process on site and even manufacture products all under one roof. In addition to recycling, we're also using this facility to expand our research and development capabilities. And most importantly, we've created an internship program for our students from partner universities to come up to Alaska each summer to work with us and sort the plastics and learn with hands-on education how to operate the machinery at an industrial scale, and learn these recycling processes so that they're better prepared to get out into the workforce. In addition to that, we have twice weekly presentations from industry professionals that teach us about all different aspects of recycling. And so this is what the facility looked like in early July after the first barge landed from Kayak Island. It really filled up the entire facility with just plastic and no room for equipment. So we had to get to quick work so we could make room for the equipment to arrive just a couple weeks later. This is what it looks like right about now. This is a few weeks ago. We're nearing completion on wiring the equipment up and hope to fire it up next week, I think. And so we're really excited to actually start processing the material and turning it back into something useful.
So after working for 17 years in marine debris, I've come to a few conclusions as we look toward the future. One that I've already touched on is that we can't prevent our way out of this. The ocean plastics problem is already at crisis level, and even if new inputs are stopped now, we'd still have years of work ahead of us just restoring the damage that's already been done. Second, grants and individual giving are still no match for the scale of the problem. The increased public investment that we're getting right now, it's a bit of a sugar high, will eventually run dry, and then what? And third, even with the increased demand for sustainable materials, we'll never recover enough value from the waste stream with all our fancy recycling. We both acknowledge this, to fund new cleanups. At best, the sale of goods only subsidizes the effort, and plastics are simply too cheap. But there may be solutions. The first one is to get more of the private sector involved. Our company is privately held. We're not a nonprofit organization. Specifically, we formed as a public benefits limited liability corporation in Oregon in 2018. Companies like ours are sometimes called B Corps, and they operate under the belief that business can do well for themselves while also doing social and environmental good. Unfortunately, Alaska doesn't recognize this type of corporate form, and we're just a regular LLC when we reincorporated here. But we're thinking about organizing a push for B Corps at the coming legislative session. It has been proposed before. But without our B corporations, we can still get the private sector involved by recognizing the restoration value in our work through carbon sequestration, nutrient transport, and other ecosystem services. Alaska and our surrounding waters have a tremendous wealth of natural capital assets. We also know those assets are at risk. Our marine ecosystems are impacted by marine debris. And our idea is if we can value these services, and then we can measure the impairment, then we can place a service value on the restoration work that we do. And so in addition to selling goods of ocean recycled materials, we'll also sell a service of ecosystem restoration. So if we can combine goods and services and develop revenue streams for each, you can build a blue economy industry. That's kind of what we are aiming to do, and maybe be one of the first to operate in, that'll allow us to potentially scale the collection efforts where they need to be. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions maybe.
Right. Oh, sorry.
Thank you guys so much for making the trek here. I have two questions, mostly about the aftermath from the plastic collection. Is most of the plastic that's processed downcycled? And then my second question is, have you guys explored bioremediation as a potential solution for plastic that's not necessarily able to be transformed into another product?
So what we're trying to do is not downcycle the materials. And this is why we're doing this research across many different technologies. Some of the materials have good physical properties as they are. And if you take the time and care to sort them not only by resin type, but also by grade. So within an individual type of resin, for different applications, so use different grades that have different properties like flow and viscosity and things like that. And so they can't be recycled together. Otherwise, you get something that's not very useful. So we take that time to do that extra level of sorting. And then on top of that, we have to sort for level of degradation as well. Right now, we do that manually, but we're looking at automated or spectroscopy type techniques to do that better. But that allows us to really push the materials into the right path for recycling. And some of that is going to be what we prefer, which is mechanical recycling, which is very low energy. And so you put the least amount of energy in and you get a high quality product. But you get something that is somewhat, it has served a life, so it's got some degradation. It's got additives, it's got different colorants. So you can't ever get to like a very pure virgin material again. And so that's where we look at things like chemical recycling, which there's many different processes, and some have pretty heavy environmental footprints and some not so much. And so we're evaluating all these and trying to decide what does make sense to do from an environmental standpoint. Is it better if you have to put so much energy into it that you're actually creating more of a hazard to the environment, then you might just be better landfilling. And that's what our research aims to uncover. As far as bioremediation, that's not an area of expertise for me. I know some of our partners are working on biological processes for recycling plastics, but unfortunately, that's not one of my areas of expertise.
Do another one in the room, and then we'll go online. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to mention I have a friend, Patrick Simpson. Do you guys know Patrick? So he got one of the sea grants, and he has Alaska Plastics Recovery, and he has a portable unit that goes around the communities and recycles the ocean plastics.
Yeah, we've known Patrick for a number of years. He's a great guy. He even after several attempts to get his early SBIR grants to develop that process, he kind of learned some lessons about what works and what doesn't work, and even put on a webinar for everybody else trying to get these grants. So he's a very thoughtful and helpful person. And so I imagine that we will be sending some material his way as well. So we've already talked to him about that. But thanks for giving a shout out to Patrick.
How scalable it is. I see you picked up from Kayak Island, you took it clear across the ocean over to Kodiak, and then, the shipping logistics, once you get it, Cordova's right there. And another island I was thinking of is Montague. It's kind of a catch-all. How scalable it is it, could you split it in Cordova? Is it the cost of doing business or what?
I think part of it, the scale is like you need some economies of scale to run this recycling equipment. So That's one reason why we're consolidating in Kodiak as kind of a crossroads of transport. It is difficult though. We're doing projects in Southeast where we're actually going to ship equipment down there so that we can process locally and get better logistics moving the material back into the markets. But it's a real challenge for sure. Do you want to add something?
So yeah, we base a lot of our operations out of Cordova. It's kind of the gateway into Kayak Island, and I think one of the things that's come to light is there's a big demand for some of the materials we're finding there. The mariculture industry, kelp farmers, an oyster farm in Homer just took 52 of our floats and is putting them right back into service. So that's the best form of recycling, and I expect that we're in communication with tribal entities in Cordova and several individual mariculturists, and even one grant was awarded to Cordova to clean up some of the barrier islands in between Kayak and Orca Inlet. And so I think we had to choose. Kodiak is a place where we made in the investment, and that's where we're aggregating materials. We just took a shipment from the Bering Sea. We also are on the straight path to Seattle through Matson, and so Matson's actually a huge corporate partner providing backhaul of our materials down to the lower 48. So not only is it our home, but it seems like a natural place to be aggregating marine debris and making that investment. But we do, I think of those 33 people, I don't have an exact number. Far and away, most of them were Alaskans, and they were from Southeast, Cordova, and also from Valdez.
Yeah, it was not try to diminish anything you're doing, but add to it. Like you said, there's tribal, there might be amazing amount of funds at a different bucket of money that might get things going. And so it might not be at the scale you're doing, but if it could be something, it sounds like there's plenty of room for, there's plenty to collect.
From scaling collection, I think that's one of the exciting things about the ACMD is that we were able to unlock a bunch more money with lower barriers to entry, so more people could get involved in the cleanup. But more importantly, I think it's what Andy was talking about with this blue economy. If we could get a value for the services, then it doesn't have to be just us. Anybody could go out and do these services and make money doing it, and you could build the industry that way and clean up the environment much quicker. But you need that economy to happen in order to really scale it. So I think that's one of the things we're most excited about, is trying to move the science to the point where we can demonstrate the value of those environmental services so that people would want to pay for them. And so that's where we're going to be putting our efforts in the coming years.
Okay, and that was part of it, more minds involved.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.